Good morning. It's an honor to be with you at this inaugural Igniting Legal Education Conference. I'm going to be addressing or providing a bird's eye overview of why to flip a classroom and macro design issues. My fellow flippers will be providing some fabulous presentations on some more specific issues. For the first 36 years of my law teaching, I was content when I reached maybe a dozen students in any particular class. It was my sense that I would have a good class as long as they were prepared and as long as I were prepared. But in reality, it was difficult to tell if I was unwittingly leaving out a lot of people. For example, I reached that dozen during that class, but what about the other 5 dozen? You know, the ones for whom the teacher's notes become the professor's notes without going through the minds of either? So basically, what I also did, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, I pursued that mythical swath that was somewhere in the middle. But in reality, I was clueless about the percentage of my students who were clueless. So perhaps the first thing you might learn or think about during my comments this morning is that smart professors learn from their mistakes, but wise professors learn from the mistakes of others. I read a news story not long ago about 2 high school teachers, science teachers, who wrote the Bible called Flip Your Classroom, Reach Every Student Every Day, and I strongly recommend that you read that booklet. It's only about 100 pages long. That led to my learning about, which some of you have probably heard about, particularly in the flipping pod, the U.S. Department of Education statistics indicating that in the blended learning format in K through 12, that the reading comprehension and understanding was improved by 35%. And this particular format is very, very suitable, most suitable for the millennials that now populate our graduate school classrooms, because theirs is the first generation that has been trained in and is equally comfortable in both the print and electronic world. The flipped classroom, as you know, involves a situation where the professor creates content on a video or a podcast the night before. The students can stop and rewind the professor. They can watch the professor in their jammies. They're therefore having more control over their own education. And essentially what they can do is they can arrive in class the next morning with a much better sense of what the materials are, so that essentially they note take less, they listen more, and that gives you, the professor, all the time you need or additional time to spread whatever icing on the cake that you deem appropriate. I now want to turn to front-end loading and back-end loading the flipped classroom. As to front-end loading, first of all, the magic bullet. There is none. There's no such thing as a magic bullet. You all know that as educators. And there's no one way to flip a classroom. That's one of the values of the various perspectives that we're going to be hearing later on today, not to mention those that are available from Professor Google. All right, I want to talk now about planning your video in my bird's eye overview. First of all, size matters, and what I mean by that is that you don't have to flip an entire course. You don't have to flip an entire class. You could just take a particular concept or concepts, ones that are particularly difficult for your students, and provide that additional help for them. You are now poised to create your own video, or your first video, excuse me. And what you could do is have a friendly chat with your students, or you could have a bullet point checklist, much like we used when we were preparing for depositions. I want to now talk about outlining. I require my students to outline, doing their own outlines starting on day number 2 rather than commercial outlines. And basically, I provide the bridge, but they've got to cross it, and they've got to do that early in my classes. Essentially, it might take 30 minutes to outline a 5-minute video, and some might complain about that, but in the very last survey that I did, 115 out of 139 responding students said that they had outlined all parts of all 21 videos in my course. So I also recommend that you do surveys. My first survey revealed the 4 corners of my film debut. First of all, the students would kind of sample a video kind of on a coffee break, then do homework, then they would outline the videos either before or after class. culminating in, much like House of Cards Season 2, binge watching my entire season for the final examination. I now want to turn to back-end loading the flipped classroom. This flipped classroom blended learning concept is not all about YouTubes and videos. What you do in the classroom is just as important, if not more so. The pedagogy should drive the technology, not the other way around, or the best technology will be trumped by bad teaching. Imagine, if you will, standing at the doorway of a classroom, and it's very, very noisy. Pandemonium reigns. You can hardly hear yourself think because the students are all talking. It's the middle of the hour, and you are presuming that the professor has totally lost control. Well, that's my classroom on multiple 5 to 7 minute work breaks, working sessions during the course of my classes. And essentially, the students are collaborating, and this is collaborative learning actually at its best. They collaborate with each other, they learn from each other. I can provide on-the-spot tutoring to individuals when they raise their hands, and essentially it's a situation where for the first time I felt that we were all in it together. I now want to talk or provide a ginormous caveat, and I want to talk about that swath of students. You know who they are. They're the lone hermits who reject civilization. So basically what you want to do for them, and I had ignored them for 36 years. That was a part of my epiphany. So basically what I do is I have ice-breaking questions I've devised, and I try to go to there and try to include them because I can kind of tell they're sitting off by themselves. For example, Ms. Jones, you studied property jurisdiction in college, right? Or Mr. Smith, did I miss anything on TMZ today while I was preparing for class? So, some advice about web surfing. Since the students will presumably be watching your videos during class when they're, with the baseball cap and the eyes sticking out of just above the top of the laptop, they're presumably watching your video. And so basically, what I tell them on day number 1 is, day trading, fine. Solitaire, fine, but I draw the line at porn. No, actually, what I do tell them is I talk about the 2010 Stanford study, which a number of you may be aware of. If not, you should read through it. Essentially, what it says is that this generation, you students, you millennials, are the best multitaskers ever. However, you are the worst at retaining the materials. It takes a web surfer half again as long to digest the materials, and that leads to the daunting question for them of, do you really have 50% more time to learn my course? So, I can't make any guarantees, but I can give you one conclusion that is crystal clear. This I can guarantee. That is that I reached more students in my first flipped class semester than I did during the prior 72 semesters of law school teaching that I had. So it was a marvelous experience for me. So in conclusion, I have now talked about 3 courses. First, the course that I planned. Second, the course that I gave. And third, the course that I wish that I would have given. So I think the perspective, and maybe one that we'll all be thinking about in today's conference, maybe one of the most important things we will all learn, is that basically, if you want to remain relevant, then you have to be willing to risk. So, thank you, American University. Thank you, Michelle Pistone, for putting on this conference. Thank you to those flipping co-presenters of mine. And also to you, the audience, the conferees who have in attendance, because basically I have been very inspired through your never-ending pursuit of pedagogical excellence. Thank you.